It is 1:00. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations to my right. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. We're so happy to have you after a week off. Go ahead and jump into our chat today. Say hello. Let us know where you're watching from. Kyla Griffin is our first person to jump into the chat today from Rialto Unified. So Kyla's so happy to have you on here. Edgar, we were gone for a week. How are you, man?
Good. It's always weird when we're not together on Wednesday here at 1:00, but excited to be back. And I will say this is kind of like summer edition. So I feel it's almost, well, you're always very well put together, Naj, your shirt and tie and coat, but I almost feel like we should be poolside, maybe sandals. I don't know, just ideas, future shows there. As Gianna points out, 4th of July, maybe I think we forgot our Star Spangled Banner attire today. So I don't know. It feels like we're missing something.
Yes, I feel like perhaps we need to have another one of those shows where you and I come dressed up for the occasion. Charlie Hoffman, our president, threw in their hot summer edition here on the lunch break. Charlie, good to see you. Gary Reller, good to see you too. Again, go ahead and jump into our chat. Before we go into the headlines and the information, I want to pass this along because Edgar and I were really, really not good about this, because clearly he's got a lot of stuff going on, me not so much. May 27th was the very first ACSA legislative lunch break. May 27th of 2020 was the very first ACSA legislative lunch break. There, Edgar, you and I are in that very first broadcast. I will tell you that we had a total of 664 views of that show between YouTube and Facebook. One of our longtime viewers that we remember being on there, Lisa Salas Brown, was one of our commenters from that very first show. There you go. You can see right there from that very first show. If you happen to be watching that show, Edgar, and you and I look so much younger in that video. If you were watching that show, go ahead and let us know in the chat. Edgar, there was so much going on.
So much going on there. Apparently, we learned how to shift our cameras since then, our camera angles. And it's like almost watching TV from the olden days. And it was only like 18 months ago. So
yeah.
COVID has not been nice to us, apparently.
Seriously. Yes. It's been interesting. Again, so good to see you guys today. Happy to have you back. Edgar, I want to tackle a couple of things before we hit our discussion with the budget. And we'll bring on Kevin Gordon from Capital Advisors onto the show in just a couple of moments. Edgar, there was this story that was in the Sacramento Bee, the edition earlier today. Sacramento area county leaders urge California to allow local decisions on masks in schools. Let me just, folks, for those of you who haven't seen this story, let me go ahead and give this information to you. The El Dorado County Board of Supervisors passed a resolution that urges California to allow local determination of whether children should wear masks to school in the fall. The resolution for healthy kids, which calls to allow parents to decide whether their children should attend school with masks, asks that school districts be able to choose their own safety protocols. Edgar, obviously, this is it. This is the kind of discussion I think we're hearing a lot more in our communities. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been. It's actually been nice seeing a few of you in person over the last couple of weeks and months. I've gotten a chance to speak some of our leaders across the state, and there's not one presentation that I've done that this is not like issue number one, and especially in some communities. That the folks and families are very passionate about this issue of mask. I think we're just in this weird place, right? Like since June 15th, it's kind of like this twilight zone. Like you walk around now in the matter of weeks, we went from everyone was wearing masks everywhere to all of a sudden in some places, it's like, oh, that person's still wearing a mask, right? So it's completely deviated. And now, but yet in schools, we're going to have a different standard. So I know people feel very, very passionate about this issue on both ends, right? Not just about the families that don't want to wear face coverings. There's some folks who don't feel comfortable unless they're assured that kids are going to continue to wear face coverings. So I think what we're hearing here from up in Northern California is a sentiment that I've heard in many communities, that families are upset that they're still, while things have shifted, that they're still going to be some of these requirements. With that said, and I know we're going to probably talk about it, we're also here. California has had all this success. We got past June 15, but now what do you go on? You go into any publication, and all we keep hearing about is Delta variant, and what whether we should be wearing masks or not. So it just puts, for the last 18 months, it's been like a roller coaster for our folks about like trying to keep up with what the latest guidelines are. And unfortunately, June 15th or not, we're still going to continue to have this back and forth.
Yeah. And actually that brings us to another, because the last paragraph in that story, state officials announced on June 9th that the state will follow masking guidelines from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention when California reopens from the coronavirus pandemic. And at that point, masks are still required inside K through 12 schools, which brings us to the fact that we've been talking about this now. It's June 30th today. We've been talking about it for more than a month, about the CDC guidelines coming down, and then that leading CDPH to come out with their guidelines on masks in schools. Of course, we still don't have that. And I had this idea, and I'm putting a disclaimer out there. I don't know if this is true. I don't know if this is factoring in. And if I'm wrong, I'm more than happy to let people know that I'm wrong about this. But I was thinking about the fact that CDC doesn't have the guidelines out as of yet. And perhaps three things might be playing into that. The positivity rates for COVID are increasing in parts of the country, even here in California. Vaccinations, the threshold still below 30% in some states, not because the vaccines aren't readily available. It's because people are choosing not to be vaccinated. And then this Delta variant that you just discussed. The AP is reporting that the Delta variant has now been found in 80 countries, and 20% of the COVID positivity cases here in the US are from that Delta variant. And now we're hearing in LA County, they're asking people to resume wearing masks indoors. I have to assume, Edgar, as the data, which has driven CDC for so long, as the data fluctuates in places, it's a really fluid situation that they're having to confront there.
Yeah, I think they're trying to walk a fine line, right? I mean, and here's the tough part with even all the headlines and trying to dig down at what the data actually says, trying to give incentives that, okay, if you get vaccinated, it's going to lead to changes, that we're going to have more freedom there. Obviously, there's still a big risk. And I think in California, even we're all celebrating the fact that we've gotten past this threshold. We're doing better than other parts of the country, than other parts of the world are doing in terms of just COVID rates. But I think there is this underlying fear about what's this going to mean. And again, as we've been saying for months now, the one segment of the population that obviously is not vaccinated yet is those individuals under 12 years old, our school age population. So I think they're just trying to walk a fine line. I know we'll ask Kevin later in the show kind of what he thinks. If he's good at having his ear to the ground of what we're hearing. What's the holdup, right? But I know in typical form, anytime we say it's coming soon, we're waiting a couple months after.
The calendar means nothing when you and I are sitting on here saying something's coming up. Folks, again, go ahead and jump into our chat. Say hello. Let us know where you're coming from. Be ready for asking questions to our guest here. Kevin Gordon is the partner and president at Capital Advisors, our expert on the California state budget. Kevin joins us here. ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Kevin, so good to have you back on the show today. So let's start off by giving the lay of the land on what's happening with the state budget. Where are we at on this? Because it seemed like this was a really fluid couple of weeks between when the constitutional deadline was and where we're at right now.
Right. So, after the legislature lowered the vote threshold, or the people lowered the vote threshold on the passage of a budget, we've had a string of many years now of on-time budgets. And, everybody got used to predicting that budgets will always be on time because they don't get paid when you don't pass a budget. But we actually saw a little diversion from that a year ago, and that was passing a budget, but then taking time to pass the trailer bills. Those are the bills that, of course, implement the details of the budget. Oftentimes for us in K-12, they're more important than almost anything else. We saw that again this year, but a little bit more problematic in that The budget that was originally passed was really kind of a shell. They did reach an agreement and did pass a budget this past week or rather this week, that in fact is the adopted budget of the state of California with a bunch of trader bills to follow. Again, a lot of unanswered questions this year on the education piece because those trader bills and the trader bill language has yet to be fully released. So we're not seeing all those details yet, but we have an idea of where they're headed. There have been announcements by leadership in the legislature and the governor on many things in education in terms of what's going to be in that agreement. And it includes some things that are a bit controversial, but again, some slight diversion from the governor's May revision. If people were watching real closely, you saw the legislature adopt its own budget plan, some weeks ago that was very different than the May revision in many ways. And in a lot of ways, it just had a lot more solutions to a variety of problems that all of us have been lobbying on. It had a really good boost for STRS and PERS. It had the sensitivity about the increase that we've gotten on unemployment insurance, and it addressed that issue. It addressed a whole lot of issues. It took the lead on saying that on special ed, yes, we want that COLA that's bigger than what the governor proposed in January. We want to match what the governor did at May Rivas, but we want to do more than that and put more discretionary money out there for special ed. They did a whole bunch of different things. And now after the negotiation, a lot of that's been pruned back. And there's some victories still in there, but there's some major missing pieces that we're not going to actually hear about till we see more of the trader bill. One great example of that is on STRS and PERS. There has been no announcement about any kind of reached agreement relative to more STRS, PERS relief for K-12 education. Those packages have typically had some relief in it in addition to community colleges. We don't see anything beyond what was always and contemplated by the governor. And the legislature had that really generous $3 billion of extra money. What we're told is sort of keep your powder dry, wait till you see the trader bill language. So that tells me that they actually are going to be doing something. We just don't know what that is yet. So hopefully we will get something meaningful in that area and not come up with nothing more than what we saw in the January proposal. Yeah.
No, I was because you're going down that. Sorry to interrupt you there. And I know one of the big topics, and we'll get. So don't answer the independent study question. Well, this is not comment not to tease you there, right? So we're going to tease our viewers so they stick around longer. So we'll get to independent study, but I think you were just actually about to talk about some of the things about just highlights in terms of, especially as we had been reporting on the fiscal front of some of the things that we liked. From the legislative version of it, and I know we don't have all the details, but from your perspective, what are like the big takeaways, both pro and con, in terms of those changes of what we've seen? Well,
probably one of the more controversial issues was the fact that the governor had proposed at the May revision to basically load up on some pretty sizable dollar amounts that would go exclusively based on concentration. So high concentration grant receiving districts or high unduplicated count districts were big winners in the governor's version. And the legislature said, look, we got poor kids in districts all over the state. It's something that we've all echoed. I know ACSA, CSBA, everybody's been on the same basically theme about the fact that, we've got some districts where you would sit there at, a 54% of your kids in poverty or English language learners or foster youth. And you'd be right next door to a district with 55% or over 55%. They get a lot, you get zero. And the legislature stepped in and said, let's take these two buckets of money and let's change them in a way that makes sure that all kids in poverty, regardless of what district they're in, is going to get some of those dollars. What happened in the budget agreement that with the governor was an interesting sort of hybrid, where they kind of split it relative to the permanent change in LCFF that benefits high concentration grant districts. So if you're over 55%, you go from getting half again as much money under LCFF to 65% more money under LCFF in that per pupil amount of money in the kick up under LCFF, and that's a permanent change to LCFF. But there was another bucket of money, and that money was aimed at extended learning and intervention that's where there was a little bit of a compromise, and more districts will play. They are going to be districts that, in fact, have levels of poverty, but you don't have to be at 85% of poverty in order to play in that. But the real loser here are really any district that's got some levels of kids in poverty, but you don't have a lot, because you would have gotten money under the legislature's version of this, and it doesn't really materialize under the governor's budget. So that's one thing to watch, kind of when we get the actual language and see how it works, the mechanics of it, and see, you know, what that distribution is. But there's that issue. One of the other major issues that, you know, we were pushing for that's not real clear, and maybe Edgar, you've got a sense of it, but we haven't been able to find it anywhere yet, is what happens to the differential between the super COLA we get on LCFF and the COLA on all other programs. I haven't seen a lot on that. Have you picked up anything on that? The COLA as it goes to all of the programs?
Yeah, that's kind of in the category of we're going to have to wait to see everything. Right. Yeah, no, I think I just echo what you said about this is what we were about things trickling out, and those that we don't know about, we're holding out hope that, you know, maybe it's just we haven't seen all those details yet.
This again is where the legislature had really done a good job of putting a higher COLA across the board to all programs, and anyways, we want to see obviously that good treatment that's given to all categorical programs, instead of what the governor had originally proposed, which was a lot less across categorical programs. He did give a larger COLA, that over 4% COLA on special ed. The other area is in special ed. The final agreement did end up distributing more money that's going to be more usable for LEAs at the local level under special ed by paying attention to that base grant in addition to the COLA. That's good news. So it's, you know, all of the sort of the news relative to all the different key issues that we've been lobbying isn't really solidified yet. And we're going to go right up to probably when we do our budget workshops in order to sort of give you the analysis of how everything shook out. But know that we expect to have some of that news really pretty soon. So we'll be looking for all of that information. There are a couple of other issues, but I want to, you know, take a breath here and see what we have first.
You're not going to let it. You're going to take away all the questions we're going to
ask. GAN limit issue is an issue, supplemental payment issue, and I'm happy to get into those if you want. But
yeah. Kevin, you'll end up being here until 2:30 if we start diving into some of those some of those things. Gary, I see your question. We will get to that, but I do have a growing list here of our viewers. Kyla Griffin, Sheila McCabe, Sarah Olson, Jenny Thomas. First, thanks everybody for being with us and jumping with your questions. Kevin, they want to know about virtual learning. They want to know about independent study. Do we have an update right now on virtual learning, on independent study? How is that supposed to come up? How is that supposed to work for the upcoming year? Because we understand details are still emerging even right now.
Yeah, and it is one of those issues that, I mean, you know, ACSA has been incredibly involved with this issue, talking about the fact that we absolutely have to have a reasonable alternative for parents and their kids as we go back into reopening this fall. There are going to be circumstances where, in fact, parents are going to want that option. There are those in the Assembly who have said absolutely not. There's those in the Senate who said, look, we're willing to work with you. We think the governor was open to stuff. We're expecting there'll be some kind of agreement. What we've been anticipating, and many of you know this, is to try to do something relative to the independent study statute that would give us some flexibility. The trick here is to give us some flexibility without ruining what the independent study statutes have enabled us to do for kids who might otherwise drop out of school. It's existed a lot longer before there was ever COVID, as we all know. And the worry is that they tweak independent study to a place where it actually damages that long-term kind of good that program has done for school districts and kids all across the state. This is one of those issues where we really don't know either what the agreement is going to end up looking like, and they're working on that trailer bill language as we speak, and we're going to find that out, I think, too, very, very soon.
Yeah, just for those that are tracking, obviously by the questions, a lot of people are tracking this, is that we are expecting that potentially we might see some some language as early as tomorrow, just in terms of some of the specific details. We have heard, some of the rumblings there where they might land, and as Kevin noted, trying to get at some of that flexibility. But we always take all of this with a grain of salt until we actually see the actual language. So way overdue. I mean, I know preaching to the choir here, right? Some of you are on the verge of now starting your next academic year, and here we're still talking about not even knowing what the rules for the next academic year are. So obviously challenging there.
Very, very legitimately frustrating. So, but one of probably the big headlines that won't get a lot of notice is that the legislature tried to deal with this thing called the GAN limit, which would have meant that a big chunk of money, $16 billion, that half of which goes to taxpayers, the other half goes to schools, gets basically worked around, so the legislature doesn't have the obligation. Well, of course, they, in good spirit, they say, let's go ahead and give money out to taxpayers the way the governor had envisioned doing it, big checks to a lot of people in advance of an election maybe this fall. But they forget the part that goes to us, the $8.1 billion that was in the governor's plan that would come to us next year by working around the GAN limit so they don't hit it. They basically skirt the obligation to give schools $8.1 billion. So people are just sort of kind of not paying a lot of attention to that issue. That's a whole lot of money that won't materialize for us that was in the governor's budget plan that as a result of negotiations doesn't materialize there. And believe me, we're going to hear more about that issue.
Hey, Kevin, we got a question from Gary Reller. It's something somewhat related here, but you're quick on your feet, so you usually know the answer to this stuff. Can you talk about briefly the California Universal Meal Program and how it actually supplements what's the federal meal program?
Right. My expectation is that it'll be a combination of state and federal resources to make sure that every single kid that wants a meal gets a meal, and that we won't be doing the kind of paperwork that we've done in the past to try to figure out who gets free and who gets reduced, who's not eligible. It's something that we've talked about for a long time, that it's just absolute silliness that we spend as much time and effort and money trying to make sure that kid who ate a lunch or a meal wasn't supposed to get it. And what are we going to do about that? Universal feeding is something that, because of the pandemic, we've got a lot of experience with, and we know from a public policy standpoint, it's the right thing to do. State policymakers are doing more in school nutrition than they've done in probably 40 years. This is a very big deal. Don't expect that the state gives you money, and then if the feds decide to follow suit, which President Biden is proposing the same thing, that you end up getting double the money. They want to make sure there's a universal meal program, but they're not going to provide money that goes beyond what it takes to just make sure that every kid that wants a meal gets that meal, and we don't have to worry about deciding who's qualified and who isn't.
Hey, Kevin, we have William Spalding asked this question specifically because you just talked about that GAN limit. Can they get away with that? Is that legit about how that distribution goes?
I'm totally expecting that the taxpayers, the California Taxpayers Association, the Jarvis GAN people will probably file some litigation. They would challenge it. But what they're working on there are certain exemptions in what counts and what doesn't count toward that state appropriations limit. And what they're doing is taking full advantage of the definitions, which include emergencies and a number of other things, to then push into those reasons why we are not hitting the GAN limit. So yeah, I think it's subject to challenge, but I do think that the education community shouldn't just roll over on this. I think we need to take a look at the merits of the argument and see whether or not we in the K-12 community agree with some of the definitions they're using. And the reason why is because this is going to have a precedential effect in the future. I mean, people have said to me, well, with all the money that the school community is getting, it seems a little greedy for you guys to be overly exercised about this $8 billion. And it's not about what's going on right now, although I still would argue that until we're in, say, the top 10% of investment by states in the nation, I don't buy the argument that we're doing just fine financially. Most of the money that we're getting, you guys know, a lot of it is one-time money. So when all the dust settles, this $8.1 billion figure is one worth examining very closely.
Hey, Kevin, so now big picture, and obviously you threw out a lot of these important details. Obviously, we don't know where we might land on some of this, but just kind of crystal ball here. I mean, one of the things we were talking about here at the beginning of the budget season, that there was a lot of stuff, right? That there was a lot of new proposals that were being thrown out there, and you know, generally positive that there was investments on a number of different ends. Now that we kind of are getting to the end here, which of all of these proposals do you think are going to have the biggest implications, kind of long term, in terms of whether it be new programs or some of the investments, or maybe some of the stuff we didn't see in the budget? Kind of what are the biggest takeaways as we move forward?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of different pockets of new money, but I would almost argue that the biggest appropriations with the biggest splash in K-12 education were already done. And that is, people forget, we have never in my entire career, and I don't know when it's ever been done before, saw the kind of proportion of our overall money that got appropriated before the Budget Act was ever considered. And that is, of course, the big appropriations that we saw in March. Those are really, really big, $6.6 billion of money, the $2 billion early incentive, but really more, that 4.6 for extended learning and intervention that was done at that point. And by the way, as districts, I think, are really grumpy that don't get any of the extended learning and intervention money that's in this latest iteration of the budget, it's really important to remind them about what you did or didn't get out of that first pot of money, because it needs to be taken in its total context. The other issue that's got some people grumpy is that the new pot of money is only TK through 6, and people are asking about the logic of that, when we know that we've got, you know, issues with regard to extended learning and intervention that's absolutely needed in middle grades and high school, yet none of that money is used for that. One of the things that we've heard out of the Capitol building is that, yes, while this latest pot of money might in fact say TK through 6, it's the distribution model that will look at the Trader Bill language, but some have asserted that districts that get that money may actually be able to use that money on upper grades. But high school districts in particular get bypassed altogether. Even high school districts with huge concentrations of poverty do not play on that big pot of money. So again, to answer your question, I think the biggest chunks of money, federal dollars, and the money that we saw in March are going to have the biggest implications when all the budget dust settles and we look back at this year. I think that's what we're going to probably conclude.
Hey, Kevin, non-budget related news. You heard Edgar and I talk about CDC, their guidelines. Is there a reason why we're still sitting here June 30th and there still aren't any CDC guidelines updated? Do you see that maybe changing over the next couple of days? How does that look from your view?
I was hoping if one of those dings Kevin was getting was an email with the CDC guidance, but maybe that one of those emails. But no.
No such thing. Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting is that, you know, CDC is pretty far out there on these issues. Is the one entity we can't forget is Cal OSHA, which gave its broad opinions about workforce and being able to be maskless in the workforce as long as people sort of self-certify that in fact that they've gotten the vaccine. One of the things that we always notice when Cal OSHA does their work is that there's a lag time between when CDPH catches up to them and issues revised guidance for us in schools. And so we were hoping that we might see some of that, but you're right, it all starts with CDC. And that is that it sort of gets the ball rolling on what we're going to do and what we would do in classrooms. And Cal OSHA did sort of reiterate that their intention was that at the classroom level that you would still be masking. So one of the questions that we've heard from superintendents is this issue about, how do I do a policy across my district where, like, if you're going to have, is it in the classroom or is it in a school or is it at any environment that's run by the school district where a kid could potentially come in? That could create disparities in what your policy is at the district office or what's at the school site versus what's in the classroom. And it's all confusing. And that's where we need to get clarity, and that's where CDPH could help out a lot right now.
Hey, Kevin, before we let you go, I wanted to bring something up. Now, you and Edgar have been very proactive over the last X number of years in updating your look. And I want to pop up these 3 images here because, Kevin, you have updated your headshot. You got the glasses going, all of that. Edgar has updated his. He's got the stubble. And feel free, folks, our viewers, to chime in on this. I haven't updated my headshot in almost 10 years. So I'm wondering your guys' opinion on this. Am I just frankly lying to people that that's what I look like now? Do I need to get this thing updated? And since you guys are out there in the Capitol and you're talking to people, give me your honest opinion, our viewers as well.
Well, I mean, there's colleagues of mine in the education community who haven't updated their pictures in maybe 20 or 30 years. So you might still be okay. You might still be able to get away with it. And I should confess, I didn't update mine for a long time. And it started to look like, well, Kevin is going blind, so he does need glasses now. I better start reflecting what I look like, or people are going to say, yeah, they promoted some event and it was somebody else's picture. So we got to make sure that at least there's some semblance of resemblance to the picture. And I think you still have enough, you might be able to get away with it. But
okay,
pretty big differences. But you might think about that in a year.
Yeah, exactly right. Edgar was telling us, hey, update my photo for like this entire year, and we finally did it. And now everybody looks better and updated and all of that. So, all right, well, Kevin Gordon, partner. Go ahead, Kevin.
The staff at ACSA told Edgar that if you didn't update your picture, they wanted him to just do a little sketch of you, and they're going to use that instead until you get your picture updated.
Hey, when you don't update your picture on this show, then you get Grant Bennett and other people, sending in your pictures from high school. So I'm just trying to be proactive.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm preventing anybody from Oakmont High School and Roseville Joint from watching this show, so they don't send any of my high school photos here. Kevin Gordon, partner and president at Capital Advisors. Kevin, honored to have you here on the show. We'll once they start figuring more stuff out over there, we'll have you back on. Thanks so much.
Great. We'll be in touch.
Hey, Edgar, I do want to tackle this real quick because I do think that you guys were in the GR team were able to address some piece of this question. And this comes in from Sheetal Singh, I believe over at Sac City Unified. She asks, do we have any updates on the Universal TK? If I remember in the points we sent out, there were some updates, but what can you tell us?
Yeah, it's going to be part of the final package. I mean, I think one of the long-term implications of this budget is that we're essentially adding another year to our traditional school system, right? So I think the implications are huge. I think one little tease, I mean, this is one where we're definitely want to see all the details, and just say a promise to our viewers, we'll do a full show on what the implications are of this transitional kindergarten proposal. And what does implementation going to look like? Obviously, I know it comes with some excitement in some neck of the woods. Obviously, it's going to be a lift for the system on moving to getting there 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of TK, I want to have us pop up a photo. One of our producers, Michael Kelly, has been off because he was welcoming his second son, the newborn to the Kelly household. That is Deacon James Kelly, born June 3rd, 8 pounds, 11 ounces, 20.5 inches. Edgar was nice enough to remind me that Deacon was born and remind all of our viewers. So there you go. A new member of the ACSA family, Edgar.
Yeah, we're excited to have Michael back, but he has been busy, obviously with Deacon. So we were very happy for his family and just excited to have Michael back as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, folks. So good to have you here on the show today as we are past the bottom of the hour. We're back here next week with more information. Hopefully we've got more on independent study, virtual learning. Maybe the CDC decides this is the week that we get something. Edgar, going to be another busy week. Good to see you today.
Always fun, Naj. See you next time.
All right. Thank you, folks, so much for being with us today here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We're back next week, 1 o'clock, live and interactive here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day.